to Teaching Tuesday. I'm glad we're here to get together again. And let me just remind everybody, yes, we are certainly here to hear Reverend Bell talk to us about racism tonight. It is one of the most important evils that falls into what the Poor People's Campaign is all about, right? It doesn't affect just one person. It affects everybody. And we all need to be aware of this. And we all need to understand our history. Because if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? So he's going to do a really great job at helping us with that. But let's also remember that that's not the only reason we're here tonight. We are here to build a community and to be a family. Because that's what we are, the human race. We are all part of the same family. And that's part of what this campaign is about, is not letting them separate us and divide us and demonize us and dehumanize us and do all those things that they want to do. We get to claim our own space and our own story and our own time and our own narrative. Performer tonight, but just in case anybody out there is feeling, Mother Karen would like to come up and say something for us tonight.
This is a paid advertisement.
A paid advertisement.
There's another grassroots movement, and it's called Hate Has No Home Here, and they're trying to get as many of these signs visible in communities and congregations. And these signs, I have some signs available through the Interfaith Coalition. We are asking for a donation if you can afford it. These go in a window, and these are $2. I also have lawn signs out in the car that have the wire thing you can stick in the ground, and those are $5. We're just asking for the cost of the signs so that then we can order more. And I have a few signs with me tonight if anybody wants one. If you can't afford one, just tell me, because we'll just give you one to put in your window. And this one I am donating to the Poor People's Campaign.
Woo! Thank you very much. That's awesome. So that's another great way to build community, is to be able to show everybody that hate has no home here. That's very important. There's a lot of other events coming up. We want to make sure that you guys come back and support us. The next Teaching Tuesday is going to be March 5th. We're going to recognize no more. We're going to say no more to domestic violence and sexual assault. We're going to team up with Catholic Charities for that night. On March 19th, we're going to smash the patriarchy. We're going to talk about what does that word mean. What is a patriarchy? How does it affect every single human on this planet? What does it actually mean? We've got some students from Ithaca College that are going to team up with me, and we're going to come in and talk about that on March 19th. Big important date. In April, we have the Poor People's Hearing coming to Elmira. We have the state steering committee, the entire state steering committee coming here to talk to us and find out what does it mean for the Poor People's Campaign. When we talk about this web of oppression that's holding us down, what does that actually feel like for us here in Elmira? We're going to call that doing time in Elmira. We're raised by prisons. We were started with a prison. We want to talk about that. What does that mean to our folks that live in this town? How does that affect us? We're going to talk about the school-to-prison pipeline. There's a lot of different aspects to what this all means, and we're going to get into all of that. So we've got that coming up. We're also going to team up with the Communication Workers of America March 21st for a safe staffing event. We're going to talk about our healthcare workers. Everybody knows healthcare workers are overworked, underpaid, and have horrible working conditions. What can we do to help them with that? We also are working with some folks to develop a unit to talk just about education. What can we do to help support our kids? We've had a lot of great stories that have come out telling us what we're doing to our kids. What can we do as the Poor People's Campaign to stand up for those kids and help them out? So we've got all those things coming up. We also want to make sure that we keep track of folks who want to be kept track of. Let me make that sound a little better. We want to stay in contact with everybody. If you could fill out the sign-in sheet and give us your email address. There's also a spot on here that says photo release. If you do not want to be a part of any of the pictures, please come find me and let me know so that I will not include you in any of our videos. I'll be honest, tonight's probably going to just focus on Reverend Bell.
Sure. Can I have that one, please?
Tonight, we'll see how that goes.
Thank you.
So we got all those things coming up and going on. We also have tomorrow night, Mothers Out Front has invited us to an online program. If you want to be a part of this, see me afterward and I'll get you the information. Mothers Out Front is going to get together to talk about the Green New Deal, exactly what that means. When we hear that word being thrown around, what all does that include and how does that affect
You can
our
record for me
ability to
real quick,
protect
right?
our environment? Ecological devastation is another big part of what we
Right, my
talk
name
about
is
with the
fine.
Poor People's Campaign. So that's going to give us some more information on that. This one I need everybody's attention. This is an important. On Wednesday, the 27th, the Poor People's Campaign is going to be part of the Free New York Day of Action. They're going to be up in Albany for an all-day event. If anybody wants to go, this is about mass incarceration. We want to talk about the fact that black New Yorkers are incarcerated at 8 times the rate of whites. That's important. We're going to talk about racism, right? This is not going to be allowed to keep standing like this. So let's speak up and have our voices heard. So we have an opportunity next Wednesday to go to Albany. If somebody wants to go and doesn't have a ride, let me know. If you want to go and you do have space in your vehicle, let me know. Because I want to go also. So lots of different events coming up, a lot of opportunities. I really hope that everybody keeps coming back because the only way we're going to do this is forward together and not one step back. So I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Bell. Thank you very much, everybody.
I want you to know I just got off the phone with Reverend Dr. Clark, and he says to me that he apologizes because he literally forgot. He knew it was on his calendar, and he forgot. He never forgets. And this time he forgot. So I said, well, I've got a pinch hit for you. And so I'm going to do the best I can for now. And I think I've got enough material to work with. If this crowd over here could come over a little bit toward this direction, then I could probably pull all of this together. And hopefully...
You sound just like a minister on Sunday morning. Come on, move down.
There's empty pews up here. Come on, guys.
Good to see you. Our conversation tonight is on racism. The last time that I presented, we looked at racism from a national standpoint. We looked at racism from New York State, and we looked at racism from a historical standpoint of Elmira to where we are today. And I mentioned some things about the work that was being done down in Binghamton with the 4 girls that had been allegedly strip searched. 12-year-old girls strip search. 12-year-old girls given the license by the ambiguity of the law that was in place to do something that perhaps overstepped the civil rights of an individual.
Thank you.
To give permission and authority in its unclearness to even damage through their actions of neglect, and it becomes a central issue in the issue of racism in America, racism anywhere. Anytime that we can disenfranchise or make unhuman any person or groups of persons for the sake of economic gain becomes problematic in the system which we support of capitalism. Capitalism by itself, without any restraints, will make subject any persons. The problem with capitalism as we have seen it throughout the years in this country has been the problem of plunder. It not just plundered groups of people that were minorities. But we also saw it plunder poor whites in this country the same way that it's plundered Indians, Native Indians, blacks, utilizing laws that never was intended to be fairly or equally applied. We see this not only with Ida B. Wells challenging the state of Mississippi with regard to its lynching laws, but I hear today in Elmira that the police have pulled aside citizens of this neighborhood because of the fact that they have a thing on their mirror as they're driving. I guess they call them a tree. They all have a certain scent and aroma to make your car smell better. But it becomes for the police an opportunity to stop and frisk, to stop and search, an excuse to pull someone over, primarily a minority. And so we see that the overreach of law is still being misapplied. The problem with it is finding enough resolve in any community to push back on the inhumane treatment that people are going through and finding enough residents from all parts in order to get this done. Yesterday I sat in on a meeting. I do this once a month with a clinical group. There's psychiatrists, psychologists, some clergy, some other people, and we do some devotional time, and then we spend some time with case study. One of the things that's not talked about oftentimes, in fact this is very interesting, one of the things that's not talked about perhaps enough is where we come from and what that makeup looks like. Because all of the issues that we have dealt with thus far, we've dealt with immigration, we've dealt with the homelessness, we've dealt with addiction, we've dealt with the fathers, mothers, troubles that we have, we've dealt with emotional, physical, psychological, social, sexual abuse. You name it, we've dealt with it. All of those are symbolic of the stress of humanity and the poverty. You know, I told you before, I quoted, there's a quote I use oftentimes, we are all insane, they're just different degrees of insanity. Mm-hmm. Here is the situation. If I take a look at a genogram is basically a circle is a female, a square is a male, and if we put them together like this, they're married, happily, whatever that means. Here's the situation. I'm taking a look at a genogram, which is a basic family, and when I take a look at that and see from this basic family comes 3 children. Are we clear which one are the boys? The square. And which one is a female? The circle. Okay, so these are daughters, 2 daughters and 1 son. Well, in this particular situation, if I can get another marker to demonstrate, there was a divorce. Okay? There was also a remarriage. And what we see is another union taking place. Out of this, she had already had a child, a girl, who now has how many children?
3.
How many girls?
2.
How many boys?
1.
Okay. Now, the amazing thing about this particular tree is that when you take a look at this particular individual and see that here's the father, here's the mother, it becomes very interesting to see what happens. They come from a father and a mother. They come from a father. Is that right? No. Okay. Now this looks like the typical family. And all of us have mothers, fathers, grandparents, great-grandparents, born of a man and a woman. This looks like our backgrounds. In fact, if I was to look at this for myself, I would probably say that for many of us, we can probably go back 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 generations, 9 or 10. But for others of us that sit in this room, many of us can't go back that far. In fact, there were some people that did not have birth certificates. Did you know that? Did you know how hard it is to file Social Security in this country if you don't have a birth certificate? Imagine having worked for the railroad system for 40, 50 years of your life, but you forgot that you didn't have a birth certificate. Can't get a birth certificate. But every time you got paid, imagine having money taken out for Social Security which you can't collect. You had your mouth open like, well, golly, I can't imagine that happening in America. And the amazing thing is that that's happened all along. The whole issue of race has been how certain things relating to economics has benefited some at the expense of others. But what we don't see oftentimes is over generations and generations and generations and generations, how the wealth factor has accumulated into the hands of a very few. And has almost made irrelevant the arguments that you and I are fighting over. Because the wealth accumulation of just a small group of people, and then oftentimes you hear about the 1%, if you could see the amount of billions and billions and billions and billions that they just got tax breaks for, and we all in New York State know what just happened to us, you begin to realize that we're fighting a war that we, number one, don't understand. And we've been trapped in it for a very long time. So I'm looking at this family, and I'm discovering that this particular person right here is the person that the whole family knows by a special coding and a special title that something happened to him. And let's just say that he fell off the apple trunk, hit his head on a rock, and he was not the same ever since. I'm just going to use that particular story. But they also know that they had 1, 2, 3 daughters. Right? This daughter was not close with this daughter. So I would do this. The relationship between the son and the father was like this. That means it was not a strong, I mean, they had things to work on. They had issues, never quite sorted out. But there was a good relationship between the mother. The problem existed here where every time this sister needed something, this husband would always go to her. Truth be told, he never knew if there was something going on between him and that sister. But what we do know is the one that had the special name that everyone knew had sexually molested this one. That was the daughter. There is a farm here, probably worth maybe about $15 million that they're involved in. This particular one has a daughter. Guess where the daughter came from? Huh? The problem with it is that this particular one, it has been discovered that he was involved with the molestation of maybe half the town. Can't figure out if this all happened before he fell off the apple cart or after. I'm bringing this up as a point of saying that we don't know if this is passed down from here. The likelihood is that some of it does pass down from generation to generation. We see the same thing with alcoholism, with drug addiction, that somewhere in the genetic makeup, there's a link between that makes us predisposed. And perhaps the biggest reason I'm bringing this up is because we tend to think, if you listen to the press or listen to funding, this morning we heard on the news that an 11-year-old boy, African American, decided that he was not going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Consequently, the aide in the school that was overseeing the school decides that this is a bad kid, and they call for the police. The police now come, and a police officer takes this kid down to the jail, of which he's now charged for misdemeanor, 11-year-old child. I don't know about you, but the point is that this 11-year-old child stands up for, and when he was asked the question, why are you not supporting the Pledge of Allegiance? And he said, in essence, because of the racism, because, the duplicity of it all. What we do see is, if this situation looks like all of our families, but only a small group are ostracized. And now this is part of the prison pipeline. Please understand that now this child is introduced to the criminal justice system. Now this 11-year boy is tagged and is thrown in the same camp as an Emmett Till, except that he has to walk and he has to remember the trauma of having gone through this and the trauma of being told that he was irrelevant because of the color of his skin, because he took a position that was different from the majority population. How far does the freedom of speech go here? Is it for some and not for all? I think that this becomes a very good model that reminds and should serve to remind us all of our own humanity. Because even in my family, in my family, I look at this and I always tell people I probably have a little Jesse James in my family. Anybody that comes from Kentucky, Western Kentucky in particular, where the moonshine flowed freely, I had to have a Jesse James somewhere in the family line in order to get through all of that. And especially in Western Kentucky. Now I want you to know in Western Kentucky, the last black person to be hung in Western Kentucky in 1936, I believe, Rainey was his last name, was hung there because allegedly this young man raped a 70-year-old white woman. What? Allegedly. And you could not imagine how many people showed up. The pictures made me feel like I was going to a Super Bowl. And they were all Caucasians. James Baldwin would say it's not white because there's no white people. But it's white is a philosophy of thinking. And I have to say that because it's very, very important for us to come to grips with that God didn't make bad. What God made was good. And we all realize that, but our environment and the people that we live with can corrupt us. And so over time, we come to evaluate and look at our family and our family tree. And you know, the amazing thing about this particular story is that nobody really wanted to talk about the secrets here.
Silence is violence.
And every generation somehow got negatively impacted and affected by what was going on back here. And as I said, I can't tell, but normally it comes down from somewhere. Most of our situations are coming from somewhere. Therefore, the learning that these kids are getting on racism is developed in their own environment, in their own homes, and is being passed from generation to generation. I have a few books, and I wanted to share with you for the short time that we would be here tonight. I'm going to talk about why it's important, and then I'm going to talk about what we can do. And I'm really trying to fill in for Dr. Clark tonight, so just work with me. Here's a book by a fellow by the name of Jared Diamond, who writes Guns, Germs, and Steel, that was written a few years back, that really talks about how what we call civilization had been won. And, you know, it's very obvious that anybody ever seen an AK-47 before? What does it look like?
It's big.
It's big. What can it do?
Shoot people.
Shoot people. Now, what would you rather have, an AK-47 or a BB gun?
BB gun.
A slingshot. Which would you consider as a weapon of mass destruction?
An AK-47.
Which one do you feel safer with?
An AK-47.
An AK-47. What Guns, Germs, and Steel has basically been about, its premise was the fact of how we use technology as a way of having dominance over civilization. We just taught in a Bible study a couple of weeks ago the first time chariots were used. Now, back in the day, a chariot was a big thing. I mean, it gave you an advantage, a tactical advantage. Tactical advantages is what every corporation has looked for in order to exploit and to get their point across. Is the reason why we have patents. To give you enough room to do the things that you want to do. So this is a good book on how it was done. And these were very, very important. Here, remember 2008 to 2006 and 2008? What happened in this country when there was a banking meltdown? Financial service firms melted down. What happened to people who found themselves as tenants? Even people who may had purchased homes and thought, you know, you got a little house, you can make a little money, got a little duplex. You weren't getting rich on it, but you know, you found yourself you found yourself caught up in this subprime loan. And the debacle of the subprime loans, and when everything crashed and they demanded the money, that put a lot of people out of business. And people who had, who were renters, a lot of them wound up on the street because they couldn't afford. Even here in Elmira, we were going through a particular period of time when rents were reasonable rates, but when people wanted to move in here because of the hydrofracking, the big business thought that they could make money. What it did was drive the rental rates up. So you've got that, you've got gentrification, you've got redlining, you've got all of those things that have impact marginalized people. And as well, where do they go? Where do they go? So what happened down in Florida is that when the property values started getting so high because of the subprime market, the demand for these loans, all of a sudden there were populations of poor people that could no longer stay in those homes. It would be just like in Elmira when the rents went from $400 and $500 for a two-bedroom apartment up to $700 and $900 a month. I mean, you've got to realize that becomes anywhere from a 30 to a 60% increase in outflow. I mean, who has that much money? That's a lot. And so we take a look at who gets hit first. It's always the poorest. It's primarily the people of color in these communities that wind up getting hurt the most during a particular time. So when you start taking a look at what we call, what James Foreman calls a pipeline, we take a look at how the system works. If you take a look at a pipeline, and forgive my art, okay? Let's call that the pipeline, all right? And in the pipeline, we want to understand that everything translates to this. And please understand that we make money on you while you're alive, and even at death. There's not one point in between that we can't make money from you. Now, having known that, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. What is your real tangible worth? So when I take a look at the housing market and look at the fact that you've got properties that were valued at a certain amount, and then in 2 years, they were just about cut in half. The markets got cut in half. And those properties now become exploitable. The problem with that was that from 2006 to 2008, when the markets went down the way they did, and these loans dried up, it pushed millions of people into the streets that should never have been in those streets. Who pays for that?
All of us.
Guess what? Let's say you had 1 million people in this New York State area that wound up on Skid Row. How many of those people ended up being incarcerated, going to the big house? Now, we have a big house in Elmira. The big house that sits on the hill. Or they might have gone to the lower house on the south side, depending upon how desperate they were. Some of them ended up becoming part of a pipeline that went here. And when they go there to the big prison or through the jail system, it costs money to house them. And it costs money to take them through the judicial system. Who benefits?
Corporation.
If you've got private ownership here, the corporation, okay, benefits. So they get paid by the bed. Who occupies the bed? Here, there are three main entities that got paid. The police, the court system, and now the prison. Off of one person. That's a trifecta. That's a trifecta. And if the majority of the people that are actually occupying our prison space, because if I took a look at DC, for instance, that if you made it to the age of 35, the likelihood is that you've been arrested at least one time in your life, if you're a black male. Did you realize that? I mean, that's a steep number when we look at the larger and recognize that that doesn't happen. That's unrealistic. Very unrealistic. And so what you do see is that in the pipeline, the cha-ching is what happens in the fragmentation of these people. Yeah, people will get paid. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of time. Then we take a look at how we see the drug markets. And this is interesting because in James Foreman's book, Locking Up Our Own Crime and Punishment in America, one of the things he talks about in this book is how the laws have been crafted and constructed on your fears. So for example, when we took a look at the influence of marijuana and the cocaine, the crack, because crack came after the cocaine market, okay, and the cocaine was more expensive than, of course, crack. Crack you could get very inexpensively. But it was interesting in the judicial system, that they were basically valued about the same. And what happened, an individual would, if you were black, you would go to jail or prison if you had the same amount of coke, and yet at the same time, on a race basis, they were never going to jail at the same rate. It was interesting to see, whether you were in Louisiana or in New York State, that the greatest population to feed that criminal justice system and to be incarcerated by the drug market were black people, or people that were marginalized at the very bottom of the scale. So it didn't matter if you were poor, if you were black, if you were white. That became a big target. And again, it became a pipeline for here, the police, the courts, and the prison, jails and prisons. Now what I like about this is that, every time you had increases of violence in these communities, and you oftentimes did with the crack and cocaine. And there are times it just got out of control. I've gone to the city council, I've gone, and spoke in front of them a number of times, and we've talked about, I don't want this place to look like Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. If you ignore poverty, this is going to happen, and we're going to have more shootings, more deaths, more people are going to die over the opiate situation and other situations. We can avoid some of this up front. Interesting. So, and true story, we get, and I go back to the minister that sits at the Lake Street Presbyterian Church, and African American minister that has it in with the police because the son and daughter has been robbed near a 7-Eleven. A few years ago, 2014, I believe, 15, something like that, has been robbed at a 7-Eleven. His wife calls him and says, this is the story. So he and his cousin gets into the car. They go over to find out what's going on. They want to make sure the children are okay. And when they get there, the police are trying to arrest an individual because of cocaine or some type of drug. The problem that he faces is that he encounters a police officer that says, "Stand down." So he says, "I'm here to see my children. Where are they? I'm minister such and such. Where are my children?" Police officer says to him a second time, "Stand down." Well, they see the cousin who had a rap sheet, but has been reformed since then. And so they throw him in the back of a police car. That's it. And then the third time, the police officer says, "Stand down." The minister has already said, "I am such and such. I am a minister. I want to know where my children are." Now you've got two conflicts. One conflict that's going on where they're trying to make arrests. Oh, by the way, did I tell you that there were 10 police officers that showed up? See, this is what they call a storming tactic that they use, they've been trained by the military in order to do that. And so 10 officers to take on one person, this is what taxpayers are paying for. They never asked the question to this young man, are you safe? They never take this into consideration, but the incident ends up where he's thrown on the ground by the police officer. He never says more than, "I am minister such and such. Where are my children?" This story gets verified by the chief of police when I confront the chief of police about this matter. And so now that I understand from him and from the chief of police that's a consistent story, I said to the chief of police, "Well, does it really take 10 people? And what about his civil liberties? Why couldn't you have had one of your men or women to pull him aside, ensure his safety, and to talk to him like he was a human being? Does it really take 10 people to do what you were doing?" Well, we couldn't tell if he had a gun or not. So I said, "You've got to worry about the taxpayer, because there's none of us that want to pay this bill. This is not what you're getting paid for." They put him in jail. He sits in jail for 4 hours. They charge him $400. They charge his cousin $400. Both of them sat in jail for time that they can't get back. They've been humiliated. They've been scarred and reminded that now black Americans and are valueless instead of valuable. But we know that that's a lie. Interesting as it seems, this is the same police department that's always overcharging the town because, they want to charge you for overtime. This is the same police department that has not paid him back time and damages. This is the same police department that wound up under Judge Campanella basically bringing this to court. This is what we went in there to fight. And this is what Judge Campanella humiliated because of the inefficiencies of a police department that was not bid properly for the support and the help of all citizens in this community. So they were embarrassed. And though this young man did not act better in terms of dispensing this whole situation, he certainly learned a lesson about the fact that he's still black in America and that there is still much more work that needs to be done in this community. And he can't just push it under all people matter. We all matter, which is true. But black people must take a stand. And we must take a stand to ensure that all people deserve the respect and mutual admiration that our inalienable rights afford, if they mean something to all of us. So when I take a look at James Foreman. In fact, he was over at Cornell University probably about 6 months ago. And he's very good. He's a lawyer. And I find his writings to be very good as he presents. So I won't bore you with reading some excerpts from it. Here's another book that I would highly recommend that you have an opportunity to read. Part of what is part of the dynamic of the rebut of the Trump administration over 8 years with Obama, being the first African-American president of the United States, is the fact that you have a certain amount of rage from the white community that did mount up. Certainly after Reconstruction, after the Emancipation Proclamation, there was Reconstruction in America. The rage that came from groups, particularly out of the South, to push back on this Reconstruction that was going on, that was real. This was, and so when you take a look at the Ku Klux Klan, and there were other groups that pushed back, this is natural. So you have, during this particular time, with Dr. Carol Alexander or Anderson talks about in terms of white rage, and the book is probably one of the best books that I've read out there on, chronicling a history of the rage, and it's absolutely incredible. It's amazing to think that there are no more lynchings. But I want you to know that last year, even in Atlanta, in the Peachtree District, there was a hanging, a lynching down there last year of a man. And, first thing I did, I said, when I looked at the report, I said, what did the noose look like? How many notches were on the noose? Because that often told which group it identified with that would have done it. Because every group tends to have their own pattern of and marker that this was mine to do. This is very serious, and I know Saturday we're supposed to be showing movies from 12 to 6 here. That 12 Years a Slave was one, Slavery by Any Other Name was a second one, and there's a third one. I forgot the name of it just now. But we wanted to certainly focus a lot on that slavery incarceration situation. What has happened in this country has been atrocious. Do you know anybody watch 12 or read 12 Years a Slave? I stumbled upon an original copy down at Livingstone College in their stacks, and I was amazed to see it. It was wonderful to put my hands on that original copy. But do you know where the key fella in there, Solomon, do you know where he came from?
It's Buffalo, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't Buffalo. It was Saratoga Springs.
Saratoga Springs.
Which isn't too far from here. Okay, it's really basically in your backyard. One of the wonderful things about the abolition movement, you'll discover and take note. In fact, Eric Fonner, historian, one of the things he points out, and I agree with him just because of my work in Buffalo, Jamestown, Auburn, Ithaca, here, this has been a major hub, and if not the most important hub of the abolition movement itself. And much of the intellectual property you're going to find here. It is incredible to see both black and white having come together in order to deal with what George Washington, Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, and all the rest did not do successfully. But to see that we have had people here in Elmira that at least have wrestled with it. It might not have been perfect. The question comes to all of us, what are we going to do? there's a story, yes.
Just before you, Sunday afternoon at Friendship Baptist Church in Corning, they're showing the movie Unconditional, and then there's going to be open dialogue, trying to start a dialogue on racism. So that's where I will be on Sunday.
Good, good, good. I just wonder, in my clinical group that I work with, one of the people were tracking the Lutheran Church from when it came to America and how it kind of splintered and where it landed. And I can remember one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how many slaves did you all own? I sometimes wonder, in mixed groups like this, when you look back in your own family trees, where was your families on this issue? Do you really know where your family was, who it was, and whether you had tension on the other side? Because I really can't tell you that. I know Becca has shared some things with us with regard to her family line. And like I said, and I admitted in my own family, I know that I had some Jesse James in my family. I had some very peculiar people, but that's part of the human drama. And that's one of the things that I don't brag about, but I'm not willing to be so shallow to think that there aren't, that I need to be silent about it, because we can do better. We can be better as we live. But I just wonder if is there any dialogue that you have or discovery that you have within your own family line that says, yes, my uncle Dennis was, oh my God, he would always tell me, I can't hang around black people, or okay, maybe he told you he was part of a lynch mob. And there are a lot that just don't want to admit it, don't want to talk about it.
We moved into a house down in North Carolina, and obviously it had been a plantation before, because my dad had went into the attic and found like 3 bills of sale for a 10-year-old African male, an 11-year-old African male, and a 5-year-old African female. And he ended up selling those to a museum or something. He made like a whole lot of money off of them, because they were in the attic of the house that we moved into down in North Carolina. And I think that was a plantation before we moved into it.
Wow.
And that was back, shoot, that was in the 70s, because I remember I was like 5 years old or something.
Yes,
Or something with you. Is the name Benjamin Lundy in anything?
Benjamin.
Lundy.
Not really. If from Buffalo, I would think, is there any connection to the folks in Lundy Lane?
I don't know about that.
We were talking about people that were part of the Loyalist group, and they were part of the wealth that was over in Ontario. That's all I can tell you.
Different family probably, I don't know. But how about William Lloyd Garrison? You know him?
Yes, of course.
Benjamin
What's
Lundy.
the question?
Benjamin Lundy was my great-great-great-grandfather, and he got William Lloyd Garrison started as an abolitionist.
He got him started. Now, what does that mean? Help us to understand what that means. Does everybody know who William Lloyd Garrison was?
He was a fiery abolitionist. He was, had charisma. And my great-great-grandfather was a little mild Quaker man. But he had an abolitionist newspaper called the Genius of Universal Emancipation.
That was your grandfather.
Great-great-great.
Great-great-great-great-grandfather.
So he had to go on trips to raise money, get prescriptions. And he was up in Boston, I think it was. And he had a meeting with some church leaders, and William Lloyd Garrison was there, and he'd been working on prohibition. So he thought, no, this is more important. So he came down and worked with Benjamin Lundy in the newspaper business. And, but he was smart. He went back north. And my grandfather stayed back in Maryland, where it wasn't too popular to be an abolitionist. You know, they were beat up quite often. But William Lloyd Garrison went back north and got the movement started up there.
William Lloyd Garrison was probably one of your most radical abolitionists that did not suggest that those of African descent that came over here would go back to Africa. You're here, you want full citizenship. He demanded it immediately. He was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass, but certainly a little bit older, very well established. And remember, in our last conversation, he came over to I think the Brennard Hotel. We had one here in Elmira. So he has come here, which really makes Elmira a major place. We talked about this place as a major depot for the military. Miles were given just for this place to be a military depot, a place where people registered for the Civil War, to fight in the Civil War, as well as a major place for the prison camps that we had. I can tell you that Salisbury, North Carolina had a prison camp, certainly Anderson, Georgia had a prison camp, and you know, this is not my thing to know where all these prison camps were, but Andersonville was a major prison camp, and Salisbury was a good side, not the biggest, but you know, and they all were not humane places. Our prisons were not much different, and you know, everybody has a story. But this was prison town. This was mass incarcerationville. This was how, I mean, think about it.
Think about the observation.
You gotta fill the seats.
I think about the observation towers on the way up Water Street that the rich could pay to watch the prisoners be walked up the street to the prison camp.
You know,
Bring the family out so we can watch the prisoners.
the reason I brought up the black person in 1930, 39, 36 that was the last person hung in the United States, African American. The reason I brought that up was because that provided a point of entertainment. How many of you saw the movie Monster Ball with Halle Berry and I forgot the fellow's name that was in there? You saw
Billy
that,
Bob Thornton.
and it provided quite a bit of entertainment for communities to see the execution or to see these kinds of things happening. I mean, even during since you talk about the Quakers, you know, they were oftentimes put on the gallows up there in Boston on Bunker Hill, along with the slaves. Did you know that? Oh yeah, oh, absolutely. You know, it was nothing to put them up there. It was. We have a terrible history of inhumanity against other humans. We can never critique and complain about other countries' treatment of people. That was what, and this leads me into the next segment, which is what can be done. Because when you begin to realize that this is not why we're here, this is not why we're here. We're not here to fight with each other this way. We're here to pull the best out of each other to make each other better, okay? But that's a judgment that I make. We waste so much talent on the criminality that we are engaged in, by exploitation, by plunder, and etc. So I have here, what has been done to correct the problems of racism? Because we see that as long as we feed the economic pipeline of divide and conquer, of making sure you have a group that you can exploit, and a group that benefits from the exploitation. We have an efficient system is what they call it in economics. An efficient system.
That profits off people.
What can be done?
Right now, we're going backwards with your current president.
Why are we going
Back in the
backwards?
50s and 60s, because he's a racist.
Okay, so you're talking about the negative influence
Top down.
of leadership.
That's not the nice way I can put it.
No, but you make a very critical point. After the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant became president. It wasn't too much longer after that many of the southern states had come to realize that, number one, America was not going to have another war with its brother. White people were not going to fight us another war like that against white people. Not in this country. Because a country that's built on majority, if you keep killing each other, you have no more country. So they were not going to do it. So that means that a concession had to be made. Interesting. So you have people like, who has a $20 bill? That's
You're at the Poor People's
That's one of
Campaign,
my
did you
things.
forget?
Right.
so, I only carry Lincolns around. I have a Lincoln, and that helps me, but I cannot carry around.
It's all about the Benjamins, but I haven't seen any, so I couldn't tell.
$20 bill.
Jackson.
Andrew who?
Andrew Jackson.
What was Andrew Jackson
I thought it was
responsible
Jefferson.
for?
All
The
the
Trail
bad
of Tears,
That's how you know I don't have
What was
any
the Trail of
money.
Tears?
that was the forced
things. Indian removal.
expulsion of the native population all the way to Oklahoma. I mean, that was,
Indians were removed. They were cast out. They were moved aside. They had to abandon their homes. Now, you know George Washington did the same thing. We had Sullivan down here.
yeah.
That ensured that, okay.
Abraham Lincoln too.
I have the white version of history of this area never mentions the native tribes that were displaced. They're not even in there. They just,
This was pristine, empty land, Connie. Come on, there was no people here.
Well, it's even more complicated than that because the Haudenosaunee were allied with the British and they had kicked out the tribes that were here before and had moved them out. So, it's easy to make it, to simplify history, but when you dig in, you start to really understand what's going on. But to your question about what has been done to correct the problems of racism, I mean, obviously not enough. But organizing has definitely made a difference. And I'm just reading right now about America during World War II, and there was some really good Black organizing going on during that time, and by collectivizing their power, they scared the bejesus out of FDR, and by whispering in Eleanor's ears, they got her to move him, and they made a lot of changes in terms of labor contracts, where the unions were trying to keep Black people out, in terms of the military, where Blacks were either not allowed or they were only in custodial or menial jobs, and over the course of a pretty short time, a lot of that changed, even due to incredible outcry of the population, but they were very, very well organized and made some pretty rapid, although of course painful, I don't want to gloss over how ugly it could get, but there's some pretty rapid advances in racial integration at that time.
So organizing, are you saying moving forward together and not one step back? Is that what I hear?
Something like that.
I want to stay with this and tie it into the organizing. First here is that you have the negative influence of or impact of leadership that starts in this country. Now I know that we've got, we've got three divisions: executive branch, we've got the legislative branch, and what's the other one? All right, and so we have here, the Trail of Tears because of, what was the president? Jackson, Andrew Jackson's leadership, okay? And we also have, he was a slaveholder and he was pro-slavery, all
Are
right?
you drawing similarities?
So what does that mean? Anytime you want, did I say the women were no different than the dogs? Did I say that?
To him? No, you did not say
No, I
that.
didn't say
I
that.
would have remembered that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you gotta think about it. You had no rights either,
That's right.
okay? You married the bums, but you had no rights. I'm saying that the way I'm saying it because
We were
this
their
was a
property.
reality and a survival, how we survived. And they controlled everything. And so slavery
Applied to us
was
too.
a way of life to maintain. Well, first of all, it gives a country an opportunity to gain some momentum. Time and money goes together. And so if this was going to be a great country, the concession was that this is how it was going to get built. Maybe until enough organizing went on to reverse that process. Because the admission is they weren't smart enough to figure out how to get it done. And maybe they weren't smart enough because they didn't have enough people and enough diversity and enough organizing and enough people that even cared to do something different than what our foreparents have done. Maybe this is the time and this is the group that's willing to be different and to try to do something different and to get the attention of a larger population that must do something different, because the only thing that this leads to is a Bolshevik-like revolution at some particular point if they continue to go the way they are, because as it stands right now, the wealth factor looks like this. This is the poor, this is the middle class, and this is what it means to have the 1%. So when people are living on, and there's not much distinction here between the poor and the middle class. When they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks from disaster, miss a paycheck, miss 2, miss 3. Someone gets sick, have a contingency, something happens. My God, have you seen what healthcare costs now? It's unbelievable today. It's just absolutely who gets quality healthcare and who doesn't. So when you take a look at all of this, we take a look at a system that was really geared that the benefits of this union went to here.
And that's what's going to
It's
happen.
only material.
Upset the whole apple cart.
Where
It's
the
not
benefits-
designed to be sustainable.
Where the benefits of this union has only gone to a handful of people is the reason why it must either bend or it will break.
Amen.
It must either change or we will find ourselves in a collision that we will not be able to sustain.
So where does the whole civil rights movement fit into
The
this
civil
picture?
rights movement, when you take a look at the seeds that went into the civil rights movement were built on the backs of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, and Rosa Parks comes later in the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was a way of looking at America and saying it had a contractual obligation to fulfill its charter to all citizens, and that people of color in America were citizens too. And what we were fighting over access to resources. Without resources, LBG says, at a commencement exercise in 1965, Howard University, he says that, we gave them the Emancipation Proclamation, but shame on us for not giving them the resources of freedom.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, what becomes fundamental in every community, including here in Elmira, is do you have a sustainable job? And one would argue that the minimum wage argument is valid to say that you have a sustainable job, and it's not. Because if I take a look at the inflation factor, add the inflation factor to what we were making in 1973, and add the inflation factor from that particular time to where it is right now, $15 is not enough. Not even close. A man went to the store 2 weeks ago to buy a pack of cigarettes. We were at a truck stop. I looked at it and said, "How much are you paying for these cigarettes?" He said, $10 and something. I thought about it and I said, I paid. My father used to make me go to the store in the 70s and buy him a pack of Camels or whatever, Marlboro, whatever they were. And I would pay a quarter for them. And I thought about that, and I said, but you're paying $10 and we paid a quarter. Yeah. And I thought about it and I said, I think that the minimum wage at that time was probably about $1.25, $1.35. And you think about inflation, I said that would be close to $40 an hour right now. $40 an hour. And I said, but you only get $15 if you're lucky, $10 maybe, depending on where you are. You had to work a whole hour for a pack of cigarettes. And I said, boy, it was better back in 73. We ought to bring Nixon back.
Hey now, I don't know about that.
Well, as a way of just talking about the relative strength of the dollar back then compared to where it is right now,
back then,
and that's fundamental for any community is having one of the key foundations that people have access to the system. So the first part, what makes it discriminating, is you have no access to the economic benefits of the union. The second part that makes it discriminating is that you have no access to the means of justice. One of the things I like about my cousin Vinny, anybody ever watch that movie? My Cousin Vinny? Yeah. My Cousin Vinny is just a wonderful movie. It makes me laugh, and then I get really mad when the public defender come in, and he seems to be a very capable attorney. But when he goes to trial, he's a bumbling idiot. And that becomes the metaphor of what the poor has continued to get in the public defendant community. And I'm not saying that they're not good people and you don't have some capable, able lawyers. They're few and far between. In New York City, just a couple years ago, the judge there ruled that the public defendant community had to cut back its caseload because they would have, one lawyer might have as much as 162 cases in the course of a year, and then a response for a lack of justice for the people that he was defending or she was defending was that they were overburdened, they couldn't spend enough time and didn't have enough resources. Well, of course you couldn't spend enough time having 162 cases. You can't concentrate on that many people. So he commanded that they were commanded to have no more than 17 cases. So the first question I had was, what were we doing on the western side in organizing to deal with the public defendant office to say that you've got too many cases? That everyone in this nation, if you cannot get adequate justice, adequate support, the possibility is that you'll never be able to fulfill the demands of the 14th and the 5th Amendment of the United States. Equal protection under the law means that there has to be value given on both sides. And if you cannot afford it, you want a bumbling idiot to be by yourself. How many people are sitting in have gone through the process of the police, the courts, and end up in prison? And guess who it is that winds up being the primary benefactor of the public defender's office? Black people. Did I say that? I did. And you know, the amazing thing about it is you take out how much that costs, not just in the prison system where it says that it costs about $30,000 a year to house an individual in a prison system. I'm not even talking about the jail system yet. But in the prison system, imagine the net cost in the justice system. And of course, you've got to pay the police and the police department. So when you add all of that up, it's like some astronomical dollar figure in the course of a year. You know, we would have been far better off if we started right in the public school system and made sure that the communities were balanced out so that there was some fundamental strength in all parts of our community, white, Latino, African American, Asian, whatever they are. We had enough support to stabilize all of those communities, because that becomes a fundamental, the first step. You got to have a good you got to have a good structured foundation, and you've got to have culture to kind of undergird the value of the community, the value of what it means to be healthy in a community. What does it mean to be human in human?